Hi.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Jan. How are
Hi.
you?
I'm fine.
Good. Thank you so much. Oh, it's still cold there, huh?
Yeah, it is still cold, but today is actually a very nice day. We have some sun, so I decided to actually to go outside, not to
Perfect.
be, all the time in my office.
Great.
Uh, I actually thought that we would see rhinos, but about 30 minutes ago they went in. So I'm sorry, I will not show you rhinos, but I might show you enclosures where Sudan lived for more than 30 years of his life.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Jan. Thank you for making time for this. And let's jump right in. I mean, I think tomorrow is the anniversary of Sudan, the last male northern white rhino. And I would really love to just start if you can tell the story about actually, the reason those northern white rhinos are still alive today is because of the work of the Dvůr Králové Zoo. And can you just kind of back up and give people a little bit of history?
Yes, so Amy, thank you very much for inviting me for this live. It's really an honor, and thank you very much for being, part of this story for I think almost 15 years or something like this. So thank you very much.
Jan, me
Uh,
too. Thank you.
I now walk in Safari Park Dvůr Králové. That's a place in the Czech Republic, and he used to be director in the late 60s and in early 70s and actually until 1980s. His name was Josef Wagner, and he fell in love with Africa. His first trip to Africa, I think, was in the end of 1967, and he realized at the time that if we wanted to be successful in breeding African ungulates, we should try to get big groups of them to be transported to European zoos. Why he did this was that already at the time he saw that many of them were disappearing in an alarming rate. And what is interesting, already in the late 60s in his diaries, we can read that he was asking himself whether it's the right thing to do it, to take animals from their natural habitat and transport them far away, thousands of kilometers, to the areas where they used to live maybe many thousand years ago. Like, for example, woolly rhino, they lived here in Europe. But of course, the animals that were not anymore living, for example, in Europe or in the US. And what is interesting, he says that he recognizes all the challenges that are related to it, even ethical challenges or implications. But he thought that it was necessary to try to establish breeding groups that would work as a reservoirs of genetic pool, and in situations that would hopefully come in many places in Africa, where the animals could come back to these places after some years, and he thought it could be even after decades, that then the zoos in Europe who would be successful in breeding of these animals should return them to the initial areas. So this was the idea behind it. It was not just capture the animals and just to show it to people who are interested here in Europe to see African mammals, African animals, but also to start conservation breeding, and when there would be a chance to send them back. And in 1975, he went to South Sudan. At the time, it was the area where perhaps where the maybe largest populations of the northern white rhinos at the time, and he managed to get 2 males and 4 females. They were brought to Dvůr Králové Zoo, I think, in September 1975, and one of these animals was Sudan. So this is how it started already back there. Our colleagues at the time immediately started with the breeding program, and they brought one more female from Knowsley in the UK. So there were 7 northern white rhinos here by 1977. The first calf was born in 1980. His name was Sunni, and actually he was among the animals that were later transported to Olpejata in 2009. So you met him here in Dvůr Králové already in 2009. And then 3 more calves were born. One in 1983, that was female, that lived all her life here in Dvůr Králové. Then it was Nain in 1989, one of the females that now are at Olpejeta. And the last was in 2000, it was Fatu. And from today's perspective, we can actually in general say that the decision to bring the northern white rhinos to Dvůr Králové Zoo actually kind of postponed their existence on the planet, because we are not aware of any other northern white rhino that would be in the wild at the moment. It's not excluded that some of them still are somewhere hidden, most likely in South Sudan. But at the moment, Nain and Fatu are the last two females that we know about. Sudan was the last male that we know about, and he died 5 years ago. And thanks to conservation breeding, we still have a chance to hopefully give future to the northern white rhinos.
Yeah, and I think for anybody tuning in, we're talking with Jan Stejskal from the Dvůr Králové Zoo, which is in the Czech Republic. The reason the northern white rhinos are alive today is really because they brought, and it was very controversial. I mean, zoos are controversial, but they brought northern white rhinos. I'm just summarizing for people. They're asking what the talk is about, but they brought the rhinos in 1975 to the zoo. And the idea back then was that they would breed them, and then the poaching was still going on. Actually, can you talk a little bit about that for anybody that doesn't know? About the poaching.
It was clear already in the 60s and 70s, and the rampant poaching of rhinos. It was especially in the 80s and on the break of 80s and 90s, and there are estimates that there were in 1975 maybe 700, 800 of the northern white rhinos in the central parts of Africa. In 1984, there were perhaps only last 15 in Garamba National Park in DR Congo, and there were no other northern white rhinos that we would know about. It was a time when started our colleague Kes Hillman-Smith. She started with her team and with her colleagues, and with support from International Rhino Foundation. They started the project to save them in the wild. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some areas, and especially these ones at the border of DR Congo, of South Sudan, of Central African Republic, and of Chad, have been for decades rather insecure. And in the end, around 2006, 2007, 2008 are the last years where we had some signs of the presence of the northern white rhinos in the wild.
And Jan, there's actually a couple questions. People want to know today, is poaching slowing down? How do you keep rhinos safe in today's world?
This is actually a question that we very often ask even ourselves, because we do send rhinos back to Africa. We did transportations of black rhinos to Tanzania or to Rwanda, and we helped establish new populations in the areas where the early populations were extirpated. So for us, it's always crucial thing to see whether the security measurements are in place and whether they are at the highest possible level. We have to come into terms with the fact that rhinos are still being poached. It might happen anywhere, to be honest, because we know about a case in a zoo that is near Paris. There was a rhino killed because of its horn in 2017. So it's not only in the wild, and it was almost unimaginable for us to see this. But even here, we have to do proper security measurements to keep our rhinos safe. So, but back to the question. In most of places, or of course in all places that we work with in Africa, the security measurements are perfect, are on the highest possible level. But of course there are still places where rhinos tend to roam free in areas where it is difficult to have them accompanied, for example, by an armed ranger all the time. So we would have to look at the specific regions. As far as I know, for example, Kenya, I think that for last 2 years there was not case of a poached rhino, which is great success.
Yeah.
And I think that the population of rhinos in Kenya is now reaching 2,000, which is quite a nice number. I'm not sure about the situation in South Africa, because South Africa was hardly hit by the wave of poaching in 2013, 14, 15. I think then the rate of poaching slowed down a bit, but I'm not sure how it is now after COVID. I think, immediately after COVID and during COVID, it was lower, because it was perhaps for all these gangs and smugglers, it was perhaps a little bit more difficult to traffic the rhino horn. But now I think at least some of the states of South Africa have very big problems with poaching again. And I heard even about insecurity close to Kruger Park. So I really wouldn't dare to say that we are out of woods yet.
This brings, I think it's so poignant because tomorrow is the 5th anniversary of Sudan dying. And I wanted to know, can you talk about, you've had a long relationship with Sudan, and what did Sudan mean for you?
It's a little bit hard question. And actually now I realize that I stand really next to enclosure where I saw Sudan for the first time. I think it was, almost, I was about at this place. I will show you the enclosure.
Oh.
It was, at the time, I was journalist and I was writing about the northern white rhinos. And when I was in the zoo, it was autumn day. It was a very beautiful day. It was not hot, but it was very warm. It was very nice for visit. In this enclosure, in the beginning, there were females, so Nain and Fatu were among them, but I was not able at the time to recognize each of them. And then they swapped them with one male, and he started to run all around the enclosure, and he went even exactly to the place where I was standing. So I was like 1 meter from him, because we have a moat here. There is no other barrier, so you can stand actually at the edge of this moat and be very close to the animals. So at the time I was very close to him. He was like almost 2 tons. So for me, even the first meeting with Sudan was very, very, very thing, that I will remember for all my life, for sure. And then, at that time, we knew that there is a very unique group of rhinos here in the zoo. And I think it was obvious for the whole world, but at the time, of course, we didn't know how unique the destiny and the legacy of Sudan will become, or would become. At that time, I'm sorry, there are a few visitors that are a little bit loud. I have to move.
You're good. We hear you.
Yeah, and so at the time he was still part of the group. There were more animals at the time. I think it was not only those 4 that were transported, but I think there were 7 at that time. Some of them were left here, and there was another male who died in 2006. And at that time it seemed that the natural mating was still a possibility. That was the reason why in 2009 they were transported to Kenya. Actually, already here in the zoo, the colleagues at the time, they started shortly after Fatu was born at 2000. They started at 2001 to cooperate with colleagues from IZW Berlin, because the rate of reproduction was actually slower and slower. If we imagine the timeline, 98 is the first rhino born here, after 3 years the second one, then after 6, third one, then after 11, the fourth one. So you see that it's more and more years between each birth of a new rhino. So they thought it would be maybe good to try deploy techniques of artificial reproduction, and they entered into cooperation with IZW Berlin, which later turned out to be crucial for our current efforts to try to save the northern white rhino.
So I remember it was a bit controversial. I remember there were protesters actually,
Yeah.
and people didn't want the rhinos to go back to, or to go to Kenya. What was that controversy about? Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that. I actually closely follow it as a journalist. Uh, it's interesting because, you know, from one side, the zoos are criticized that they keep animals in a confined spaces, but modern zoos keep animals in a very large spaces, and especially for ungulates, I would say that the conditions in the zoos can be very beneficial. And on the other hand, there are a lot of fans of zoos that think that actually animals in a zoo are kept in a safer conditions than when they are in the wild. So you get actually criticized from both sides, and the arguments behind criticizing the move was that the group of the northern white rhinos was so small, and there were no news about some northern white rhinos being still in the wild, that it seemed for some of the people that it would be better to keep them in a zoo because it would be easier to access them for the artificial reproduction procedures.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I would say, you know, from my point of view, there were even other points behind it, or maybe other reasons, but they were personal. So if we leave aside personal reasons, I think this is reason that has some rationality.
Yeah. And actually now I want to kind of twist a little bit and talk about, this story is really personal to you. I mean, you changed your life. You were a journalist,
Yeah.
and I would love if you could really talk about how this story of the northern white rhinos truly impacted you. And the work you're doing today is because of the northern white rhinos. Is that right?
It's partly true, but on the other hand, I would say it was the catalyst. Do you say this word in
Right.
English?
Yes.
Yes.
The catalyst.
Or
Yeah.
something what was perhaps already happening inside me, because
Okay.
it was, in general, it was for me harder and harder to believe that you can change something within journalism, to be honest, because, you know, I was convinced that if you properly inform, if you report about the uh, important issues and all these things, that you can change the world. And at a certain moment of my life, I was not sure about it anymore. So I thought it would be perhaps better if I, you know, put hands on real things and get involved by myself more directly into conservation.
Yeah.
And at that time, I wrote a story about the northern white rhinos, and it's true that then it was, of course, about the zoo as well. Not only about the zoo, it was about all Pegeta and, you know, all the parties that have been involved in the efforts to save the northern white rhino. And yeah, following our discussion with the director of Safari Park Dvůr Králové, he decided to employ me and try to kind of restart the efforts to save the northern white rhino. Because when I joined the zoo, to be honest, at the time, the whole cooperation was a little bit sleeping, and because I was new to the situation and I didn't have any prejudices who to talk to and who not to talk to, I think I was lucky to be in a position where a lot of people started to cooperating again.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that I actually, this is a nice segue into the biorescue project, and Jan is a really important part of the race to save the northern white rhinos from extinction. And I wondered if you, first of all, before we start talking about that, I just want to talk about, what is the loss of the northern white rhino? What does that mean to humankind? I mean, why should this story matter to anybody listening around
Yeah.
the world?
This is actually a very complex question that I think actually even for many people it can have a different answers, to be honest.
Right.
One Well, one thing I realized, for example, when I was last year in South Sudan, because I wanted to meet conservation authorities in the country, because I wanted to see with my own eyes whether the rumors that there are still northern white rhinos somewhere hidden, whether in general it could be true or not. And what is interesting, it's a very difficult country for travel. I think the number of people that might see rhino is extremely low, extremely low. But you speak to officials from national park services, and then you actually realize that they have, on their shoulder, on their logo, they have a rhino.
Oh,
And there are, as many other states, South Sudan consists of some states, and some of these states, they have in their flag, they have a rhino. And
wow.
then you speak to people, and they speak about rhinos like something what was very important for their culture. So this is actually, because when we speak about conservation, we very often speak about functions in the ecosystems and all these things. But there is a connection with local people that is sometimes difficult for us to imagine. But maybe we could imagine that. I know in Europe that a lot of people have a very strong connection, for example, to wolves or to birds. And when we speak about some communities in Africa, it seems that they had, for example, similar connection maybe to rhinos or to some other charismatic animals. And despite the fact that they maybe didn't see them for their whole life, they just heard about them, that they are somewhere there around them, it's still very, very strong part of their culture. It can be tracked even, in the stories that they told, or their grandmothers told, or their grandfathers told. So I just wanted to mention this aspect that we do not speak that much about, especially, let's say, us conservationists, because we speak about animals and we speak about, let's say, if we lose this specific species, it of course has the consequences for the whole ecosystem, which is everything true, but it's not everything what we lose when we lose a species. There is much more behind it. It's even some kind of thinking that it's actually about our whole relationship with the wild world, with the wild nature. But I believe it's even about relationship with wildness that is in us as people. Because it's this relation that I believe makes us better human and more open human and more appreciating the things that are about us that are not under our control.
I mean, I that is so beautiful, Jan. And you said this in the past, when Sudan passed away, that the thing that struck you was he was the last truly wild northern white rhino. And that struck me. And I don't know if you want to add to that, but I'll never forget that statement. That was part of why it was so sad.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, it's difficult to explain it, but yeah, that was one of when I realized that he was really he was not born in a zoo. He was born in South Sudan. He was born in middle of something what is called Sud, which is the inner delta of the River Nile. It's a very, very large space that is seasonally flooded with the waters of it's very difficult to somehow penetrate it, to visit it, to go there. So it seems like he was born somewhere where it is extremely difficult for people to reach this place. And it's a very symbolic, because of course we can have animals here to be born in the zoo, and I think we are on a way to save them through our work in the laboratories. But this realization that he was the last wild, so it means, let's say, not produced by us. It was very hard for me to realize it.
I'm sorry, and I guess, can you summarize for anybody listening that doesn't know the current status, and then we can now talk about biorescue?
Yeah.
There's two females. Can you just give a summary of what the situation is now? Thanks,
Maybe I
Jan.
could continue from 2009. At that time,
Yeah.
there were 2 males and 2 females transported to Olpejeta in the hope that the more natural environment would prompt their breeding. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And in 2014, a team of ICW Berlin and Kenya Wildlife Service and Dvůr Králové Zoo and of course Olpejeta, we gathered together to check the last females, Nain and Fatu, and to check even Sudan, because that was surprising for me a lot, because before that in a zoos, our colleagues already started with collection of a lot of samples, because they realized that there might be in future a chance to save the whole species through the artificial techniques of reproduction. But there was not collected actually semen from Sudan before.
Wow.
So we gathered at Olpejeta, and unfortunately we found out that none of the females is capable of carrying pregnancy to the full term. Fatu, the younger one, she has the pathological changes in her endometrium, in her uterus. And Nayan, she, at that time, I think she would be able to carry the pregnancy, but she had problems with her hind legs. So she would not be, it would be very difficult for her to give a birth to a baby. And yeah, at that time we collected even semen from Sudan. But the crucial thing that we found out was that there is no chance anymore for the northern white rhinos for natural breeding. And at that time, with support from many colleagues, we come up with a plan to try to develop advanced techniques of artificial reproduction that would even actually work with the stem cells of the rhinos. So it basically maybe, so we are now in the beginning of 2015, and then many years we had to, especially our colleagues from ICW Berlin or our colleague Cesare Gali from Avantea Cremona, they had to develop and describe protocols, for example, how to collect eggs from white rhino females, how to make embryos from these eggs. This was not known to the world. We have an example with the cattle, we have an example with horses that it's possible, but it's of course completely new for rhinos, because rhinos are much bigger. White rhino has 2 tons. It's a really large animal, and ovaries are 1.5 meter inside body. So it's very, very challenging for anybody to work with these animals. So at the time we started to get together a scientific team, consortium, that I have a honor to coordinate. And we started first with the southern white rhino females actually in the European zoos, because we didn't know exactly, or we wanted to optimize the techniques that we thought could work. And of course, it would not be possible to work all the time with the northern white rhino females, as they were only 2. So all the techniques were developed with the work with the southern white rhino females that had their own reproduction problems. And then when we were able that we would be able to make an embryo of a northern white rhino, only then we went to Kenya. This was in 2019. It was in August. And this, yeah, it's actually, when I think about it, it's very interesting, but we have to collect the eggs from the female in the morning. Then we have to jump on a plane to fly to Nairobi International Airport. And overnight, we have to take them to a laboratory in Italy. Then they have to get matured. And in about 2 or 3 days, they are fertilized. And then we wait whether the embryo would develop from such a fertilized egg. And usually this whole operation from collection until the blastocyst stage of embryonic development, which is the stage in which we can freeze the embryo, it takes usually 10 to 12 days, maybe to 14 sometimes. So I think it's understood that from what I said, it's logistically quite demanding operation. But on the other hand, it's the only way how to give a future, or hopefully give a future, to the northern white rhino. And it's a bit adventurous as well.
It It is. I mean, I just want to highlight something because I had the privilege of going on one of these trips, and you realize like if the plane is delayed, if there's like any, I mean, they're
Yeah.
taking commercial airlines. The first time the customs people weren't used to having the, these O-sites coming through
Yeah.
customs. And
I
and I just had this like momentary you know moment of horror where it was like, are they going to get through? The fate of
yes.
the northern white rhinos lies on this procedure, and it is extraordinary what has been happening like through the pandemic, the trips
Yeah.
that were made when the world shut down to keep this species alive. And today you have 24 viable
Yes.
embryos, is
Yes.
that right?
Now there are 24 viable northern white rhino embryos. Uh, it seems, that on average we are able to make 2 embryos per procedure, and that there was actually another breakthrough. Well, in general, if I may explain,
Yeah.
what we need to
Thank you.
do to save the
Yeah.
northern white rhino is to produce their embryos.
Right.
And there are 2 ways how to achieve it. One is collect eggs from a last donor from FATU, take it to Italy to a laboratory, fertilize it with the semen from already deceased males. This semen is cryopreserved. And of course it's thawed, and then it is used for fertilization of this egg. And in this way, we do embryos or produce embryos from the last living donor. So this is one way how to achieve embryos. The other way how to achieve embryos is to actually make them from stem cells. And it would be perhaps a little bit difficult, but in general, we can call it reprogramming. For example, from a tissue sample, if it is live, or fibroblast culture, which is a live cell culture, you can produce so-called induced pluripotent stem cell. And with our colleagues from Osaka University that are led by Professor Katsuhiko Hayashi, so this team was able, and it was published just in December 2022, to produce something what's called primordial germ cells. And these cells are like a precursor for having eggs to be produced in a laboratory. So this is other way how to produce embryos. And the advantage of this other way through stem cells is in 2 things. One thing is that when the protocol is properly described, it will be easier to make northern white rhino embryos in larger numbers. So this is one advantage. And the second advantage is that we could include into these procedures, or into this making of embryos, more individuals. So now, when we do the procedures with FATU, we can do it like 3 or 4 times per year. And if we stay on average 2 embryos per procedure, we are at some 6 or 8 embryos per year. With the work, with the protocol through stem cells, it would be definitely possible to make more embryos per year. And it would be possible to do it not only from 1 female, but from more females. So this is another advantage. But there is still a lot ahead of us. We are at the edge of current scientific knowledge. And we just hope that our colleagues in Japan that are really top experts in this field will make it possible in, let's say, 3, 4, maybe 5 years to produce embryos completely in the lab.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, and then, just a few other questions. Given that we have put these animals in this place, is it our responsibility to bring them back?
I actually think so, because, I kind of understand that there can be some arguments or reasons why we should not resurrect some species. I do not necessarily share them. But in a case of a northern white rhino, I think it is really our responsibility, and it's highly on our shoulders as humans, because it was us who brought them to the edge. It's us who brought them to the brink of extinction. It was not some other natural causes. It was just that we killed them because of their horn. So it was us who pushed them so far. And if we have at our fingers the techniques that could save them, I think we are really obliged. It is our responsibility to try to save them.
Mhm.
And yes, sometimes we are criticized that we spend too much money on saving one species. I think this is complete nonsense, because when I see for what people are spending money, then come on, saving the northern white rhino, it's a noble cause. It's perfect way how you can spend money.
No. That argument blows my mind,
Yeah.
and it's not like it's coming from one pool of money that another species not being saved. But the other thing I think is really important to highlight is that this science that you all have, Thomas and the Biorescue Consortium is creating has so many implications for other species. I mean, just think about even directly all of the other species of rhinos, but then other, what is it, 42,000 animals? I mean, can you talk about that a little?
To be honest, I don't think that this could be possible to be used for 42,000 species of animals,
Right,
or
right.
for more. And perhaps despite the fact that I tend to see nature as a whole, and give give appreciation to every species. I think we just have to somehow, I don't know how to say it, accept or maybe I think it's understandable that the rhinos or some other very charismatic animals are really followed by public and on a spotlight. It's just, they are so nice, so cool, so charismatic, so visible, and perhaps even so missing in the areas from which they disappeared, that of course it brings attention to them. But back to the question, yeah, it's for example, the team that works on the northern white rhinos is the same team that works even on trying to save Sumatran rhino. So it's definitely true that the knowledge and experience gathered through our work with the northern white rhinos can be used for hopefully trying to save even Sumatran rhino. And for other species, definitely as well. On the other hand, I'm not sure whether it will be for 40,000. And still, the best way, what we can do for any species is not to get it on the brink of extinction, but to keep right natural habitat for it, so the populations can survive in their natural habitat. This is the best way what we can do. And I would be really happy if this was true even for the northern white rhino. I would be actually very happy not to coordinate a team that's trying to save the last two. I would be very happy to go to South Sudan and see 2,000 of them there roaming free. That would be fantastic. So on the other hand, I hope that as a consequence of our current action will be that maybe not me, but maybe my kids will be able to go to South Sudan and see 2,000 northern white rhinos roaming there free.
I mean, I think that's the best way to end this. That's absolutely right. And I think that's, if there's any last thoughts about the legacy of Sudan, given that tomorrow is the anniversary of his passing. Is that I mean, that was so beautiful, and I think that's right. Are there any other last thoughts?
I think, no, this would be the best actually, how we can kind of fulfill his legacy or follow his legacy, to work on trying to save the northern white rhino, and hopefully his offspring or future generations of his offspring, of his initial offspring, could come back to the original range. That would be fantastic. It's actually why he was named Sudan, because he was from that era. So it would be great if we could return the northern white rhino to the original home of Sudan.
Jan, thank you so much. Thank you for all of the work that you have committed your life to doing. And if anybody has not seen it, Jan has given a lovely TED Talk on the northern white rhinos as well. And
It's
if you're in,
animation, it's really nice animated. It's cool.
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really fantastic talk, and also if you're in the Czech Republic, go to Safari Park Dvůr Králové. It is an extraordinary place, and the work that you're doing. I mean, not all zoos are the same, but I would say the work you're doing to restore species around the world, and the work you're doing, it's pretty amazing. Are there places people can learn more about what you're doing?
Yes, for sure. On our website, which is safaripark.cz, and about the work that we do with the northern white rhinos is biorescue, so website biorescue project.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, everyone is most welcome. And Amy, I wanted to thank you very much for invitation, and I just wanted to, to express my gratitude for everything what you do, and really appreciate how you didn't lose your faith in media, and that you can still make a positive change with media. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and not only for supporting and cooperating with us and with our project to save the northern white rhino, but even for other projects that you do. I really highly appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you. It's
Thank
always
you.
a privilege, really. Well, you have a beautiful weekend, and it's so good to talk to you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much. And yeah, thank you very much, even everyone, for following the interview, and have a nice weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Jan.
Bye bye.
Bye.